Welcome to the world's countries, our slow-moving and quietly detailed journey through every country on Earth, one by one, without hurry and without pressure to make it to any particular destination in a set amount of time. This is not the kind of program that rushes from highlight to highlight or tries to sell you on the idea of visiting somewhere as quickly as possible. Instead, we pause on details, we notice small things, and we allow the story of each place to unfold at its own pace. If you have been with us for previous episodes, you will know that we cover geography, history, culture, and sometimes even the questions people most often search online about a place. We do this not with excitement and fanfare, but with the calm, steady tone of a long conversation that can stretch on into the evening without the need to be anywhere else. In this series, the countries are chosen in no particular order. There is no continent-by-continent schedule and no ranking of importance, size, or fame. One week we might be talking about a vast, landlocked state in the middle of a continent. The next we might find ourselves in a tiny island nation surrounded by nothing but ocean. This randomness is part of the charm. It allows each country to appear as it is, without being framed as the next step on a fixed itinerary. Today, the country that has come up for us to spend time with is Cape Verde, or Cabo Verde, as it is officially known in Portuguese, the language of its government and much of its public life. Cape Verde is, geographically speaking, a group of islands sitting in the Atlantic Ocean, off the western coast of Africa. It is not a country that most people encounter in everyday conversation unless they have some particular connection to it, perhaps through family, travel, or a specific interest in island nations. And yet, it has a story that touches on some of the great themes of world history: exploration, trade, migration, and the blending of cultures, all within an area smaller than many cities in the world. Before we start to explore those themes, it's worth reflecting on the pace and style of what we are about to do. This episode will not try to compress Cape Verde into a quick summary. Instead, we will take our time moving through different aspects of the country: its geography, its natural features, the way its climate shapes life there, its population, languages, and culture, its history, both distant and recent, what the country is like today, how it appears to visitors, and finally, some smaller facts and observations that might not make it into a standard reference text, but are still worth noting. Part of the reason we move slowly is because places are complex. Even a small island nation like Cape Verde is not just a dot on a map. It is a collection of environments, communities, and histories. By taking time, we make space for these layers to appear. And part of the reason is that, for many listeners, the purpose of this series is also to create a calm space. Geography and history, when spoken in an even, steady tone, can be surprisingly restful. This is why the podcast is made in such a way that it can be listened to late at night, or in moments when you want to set aside the noise and hurry of the day. When we say that Cape Verde is the country we have drawn for this episode, that is not a metaphor. The order really is randomized. So Cape Verde has not appeared here because it fits thematically with the last country we discussed, or because there is some special anniversary connected to it. It appears simply because the process we use put it here. In this way, our journey has a certain honesty. We do not begin with the most famous or the most powerful, nor do we leave smaller or less-known nations until last. Each country, when it arrives, gets the same kind of attention. Now, in the case of Cape Verde, the attention will lead us to think about islands and about distances across the sea, distances between continents, and also the kind of distances created by history, where certain events feel both far away and strangely close. We will find ourselves looking at maps, but also at stories, because the facts of Cape Verde's location and size are only the starting points for understanding it. You may already know that Cape Verde is made up of 10 main islands, of which 9 are inhabited and a scattering of smaller islets. You may not know their names or the way they are divided into two groups: the Barlavento, or Windward Islands, and the Sotavento, or Leeward Islands. You may have heard of the capital, Praia, or of the cultural center Mindelo, or perhaps of the volcanic island of Fogo. Or you may come to this with no particular knowledge, which is equally fine. We will not assume you know more than you do. Each fact will be introduced as if we are starting from the beginning. Because this is the world's countries, we will also acknowledge that mistakes can happen, even with careful research. Information changes over time, especially statistics about population or economics, and even long-standing facts can be updated as new research comes in. So, if you hear something that you know to be out of date, or if you have a perspective from personal experience of Cape Verde that adds to or corrects what we say here, we would welcome that. A country is always more than the sum of what can be said in a single recording. This openness to correction is especially important with places that have a living diaspora. And Cape Verde's is very large, larger in number than the population living on the islands themselves. That means there are many Cape Verdeans around the world who may hear their country described here and recognize details from their own lives, or notice things that do not match their experience. Including those voices, in thought if not in the recording, helps keep the picture from becoming too fixed. As we begin, you might imagine yourself sitting somewhere comfortable, perhaps at home with a cup of tea, perhaps traveling yourself but listening with headphones, or perhaps lying in bed, letting the words become a slow rhythm. The ocean will come up often in this episode, not because we are trying to be poetic, but because it is impossible to talk about Cape Verde without it. The ocean is its border, its road, its history, and in many ways its future. In the next section, we will move into the geography of Cape Verde in a more precise way. Where exactly it is, how far it is from other places, and how its islands are arranged. But for now, in this introduction, the goal is simply to set the scene. A small island country in the Atlantic, with a name you may have heard but perhaps have not spent much time thinking about, is about to open itself slowly to our attention. Geography and location. Cape Verde, or Cabo Verde, exists as a cluster of islands adrift in the eastern Atlantic Ocean, separated from the African mainland by hundreds of kilometers of open water. When looking at a map of West Africa, your eyes might first follow the coastline, the curve that runs down from Western Sahara to Mauritania, Senegal, and the Gambia, before sweeping further south towards Guinea-Bissau and beyond. If you shift your gaze just a little to the left, to the west, over the blue expanse, you will find a small scatter of shapes. These are the islands of Cape Verde, placed far enough out to sea that they form a world of their own, yet close enough to be tied, in history and in culture, to the mainland. The exact position of the archipelago can be given in coordinates, roughly between 14 and 17 degrees north of the equator and 22 to 25 degrees west of the Greenwich meridian. But numbers on their own rarely make a mental picture. Instead, it can help to think of the distance. From the westernmost island of Cape Verde to the coast of Senegal is about 600 kilometers. In nautical terms, that is several days sailing for historical ships, but for a modern aircraft it is less than an hour's flight. This distance has always shaped the relationship between Cape Verde and the continent. Close enough for contact and trade, far enough for the islands to develop a distinct identity. The archipelago is divided into two main groups. To the north and northeast lie the Barlavento, or Windward Islands. Santo Anteo, São Vicente, Santa Luzia, uninhabited. São Nicolau, Sal, and Boa Vista. These islands face the prevailing northeast trade winds directly, and their position has historically influenced both navigation and climate. To the south lie the Sotavento, or Leeward Islands, Maio, Santiago, Fogo, and Brava. The names, Windward and Leeward, come from maritime language, reflecting the way sailors have approached and described them for centuries. Each island has its own shape, size, and terrain, and although they share certain features, volcanic origins, rocky coastlines, a lack of large rivers, the variety among them is considerable. Some are relatively flat and dry, like Sal and Boa Vista, with long stretches of sandy beach and interior plains where vegetation is sparse. Others are mountainous and dramatic, like Santo Anteo, with deep valleys, steep ridges, and terraced hillsides that catch what little rain falls. Fogo is dominated by its volcano, Pico do Fogo, a single peak that rises almost 3 kilometers above sea level, visible from far out at sea. Cape Verde's maritime borders extend well beyond the land you can stand on. Like most coastal nations, it claims a territorial sea extending 12 nautical miles from its shores and an exclusive economic zone reaching 200 nautical miles out. This gives the country rights to a large area of ocean relative to its land area, an important fact for fishing and potential offshore resources. The ocean, in this sense, is part of the country's territory, even if it is not solid ground. If we compare Cape Verde to other island nations, it sits in an interesting category. It is smaller in area than places like Iceland or Sri Lanka, but larger than many Caribbean states. Its separation from the mainland is greater than that of, for example, Bahrain or Singapore, but less than the isolation of island nations in the Pacific like Fiji or Samoa. In African terms, it is one of the continent's few fully insular countries, along with nations such as Seychelles, Comoros, and Mauritius. The position of Cape Verde also places it within certain oceanic and climatic zones that have mattered in both natural and human history. The islands sit near the path of the northeast trade winds, which for centuries carried sailing ships from Europe down to the coast of Africa and then across the Atlantic to the Americas. In the age of sail, Cape Verde was an important stopover, a place to take on fresh water and provisions before making the long ocean crossing. Today, its location still matters for air and sea routes, though the needs are different. For modern shipping, the islands are near busy transatlantic lanes, and for aviation, they can serve as a refueling or technical stop for certain long-haul flights. From a geological perspective, Cape Verde is part of a chain of volcanic islands formed over millions of years by activity on the ocean floor. The islands rise steeply from deep water. There is no wide continental shelf linking them to Africa. This steep rise means that, within a short distance from the shore, the seabed drops away to great depths, influencing both marine life and human use of the surrounding waters. Looking outward from the islands, the nearest land you would see, if you could see over the horizon, would be the African mainland to the east. To the west, the next significant landmass is the South American coast, far beyond the range of sight, thousands of kilometers away. To the north and south, it is open water until you reach other islands or continents. This openness has both exposed and protected Cape Verde over time. It has made it accessible to those with the means to cross the sea, but it has also kept it from being swept into the same patterns of overland conflict that have shaped mainland Africa. When thinking about geography, it is also worth noting how the islands are spaced in relation to each other. Some are only a short ferry ride apart, while others require a long sea crossing or a flight. This affects everything from transport and communication to the sense of local identity. People on one island may have more regular contact with the mainland via shipping routes than with residents of a more distant island in their own country. If we picture Cape Verde on a globe, we also notice that it lies not far from the Tropic of Cancer, which passes just to its north. This position influences its climate and the length of daylight throughout the year. Unlike countries far from the equator, Cape Verde does not have extreme seasonal changes in day length. The variation between summer and winter daylight hours is modest. All of these geographical facts, position, distance, division into island groups, volcanic origin, maritime territory, form the framework in which the country's history and society have developed. Geography is not destiny, but it is the stage on which the drama of a country's life plays out, and in Cape Verde's case, that stage is set far out in the Atlantic, bounded on all sides by the same ocean that brought its first settlers and continues to connect it to the wider world. Nature and landscape. To understand Cape Verde beyond the lines on a map, it helps to picture the physical reality of its islands. The shapes they take, the colors of the land, the way the ground rises and falls, and how the environment changes from place to place. Although the entire country covers just over 4,000 square kilometers, the variety within that space is remarkable, shaped by its volcanic origins, the effects of erosion, and the influence of the surrounding Atlantic Ocean. The most dominant natural feature in Cape Verde is Pico do Fogo, a volcano on the island of Fogo. At 2,829 meters above sea level, it is the highest point in the country and can be seen from neighboring islands on clear days. Its slopes are a reminder that the archipelago was formed by volcanic activity millions of years ago. The most recent eruption, in 2014 to 2015, displaced communities and reshaped parts of the landscape, covering farmland with fresh lava. Even so, life has returned to many of the affected areas, with farmers cultivating crops in the fertile volcanic soil that surrounds the mountain. These soils, rich in minerals, can be surprisingly productive where water is available, supporting vineyards and coffee plantations that are unusual in a country with such a dry climate. But Pico do Fogo is not the only mountain in Cape Verde. The island of Santo Anteo, for example, is a dramatic landscape of peaks and ridges, with deep valleys carved by erosion over centuries. Terraced fields cling to the slopes, making use of every possible space where crops can grow. The eastern side of the island is drier, while the higher elevations in the west catch more moisture from the clouds, supporting greener vegetation. This contrast within a single island is a pattern repeated across the country. Variations in elevation and exposure to the prevailing winds create small pockets of different climates and ecosystems. Some islands, like Sal and Boa Vista, are far flatter. Their landscapes are defined by wide, sandy plains and low hills, with long beaches stretching along the coast. These islands are shaped by wind as much as by rock, and their names reflect their character. Sal meaning salt in Portuguese, after the salt flats that were once an important resource, and Boa Vista meaning good view, for the expansive horizons and clear sightlines across sea and land. The flatness of these islands means that the sea is often visible from far inland, and the wind moves without obstruction, creating shifting dunes in some areas. Cape Verde's coastline is generally rugged, with cliffs, rocky headlands, and small bays. In places, the ocean meets the land in long, open beaches of sand, while in others it crashes against lava rock, sending spray into the air. The meeting point between sea and land is always active, shaped by tides, storms, and the constant rhythm of waves. For centuries, these coasts have been both a barrier and a connection. Dangerous to approach without skill, but also the gateway for all movement to and from the islands. Because the islands rise steeply from the ocean floor, there are no wide continental shelves, and the sea becomes deep quite close to shore. This affects both the marine environment and human activity. The surrounding waters are rich in fish, and the drop-offs near the coast attract species that live in deeper habitats. At the same time, the steep underwater terrain has limited the development of large natural harbors. Ports have had to be built and maintained carefully to protect ships from ocean swells. Freshwater is one of Cape Verde's most limited natural resources. There are no large rivers and permanent streams are rare. Most watercourses are seasonal, flowing only after heavy rains. This scarcity has shaped settlement patterns and agriculture since the first human arrival. In modern times, Reservoirs and cisterns store rainwater where possible, and desalination plants on some islands provide drinking water. But in rural areas, access can still be a challenge. The lack of abundant fresh water also means that natural lakes are virtually non-existent, and wetlands are small and few. Vegetation across the islands reflects the dry climate. In lower, drier areas, the landscape is often covered with sparse grasses, shrubs, and hardy plants adapted to conserve water. In higher and wetter zones, there may be pockets of woodland, including species introduced over the centuries by settlers and traders. These introduced plants range from useful crops to trees planted for shade or erosion control. In some areas, especially where reforestation projects have been active, you can find groves of pine, eucalyptus, or acacia, contrasting with the surrounding dry slopes. Erosion is a constant factor in shaping the land. On steeper slopes, heavy rain, when it does come, can wash away soil quickly, especially if vegetation is sparse. This has long been a problem for farmers, who have built terraces and stone walls to slow the runoff and keep the soil in place. On the coast, wind-driven sand can reshape beaches and dunes from year to year. The combined effects of wind, water, and volcanic activity give the islands a dynamic quality. The land is never quite the same from one generation to the next. The uninhabited island of Santa Luzia and several smaller islets have remained largely untouched by human development. These areas are important for wildlife, especially seabirds, and they also preserve a sense of what the islands might have looked like before permanent settlement. Visiting such places can feel like stepping back in time, though access is often limited to protect their ecosystems. Marine life is another part of Cape Verde's natural landscape, even though it is beneath the surface. The surrounding Atlantic waters are home to dolphins, whales, and sea turtles, including the loggerhead turtle, which nests on several islands. Coral reefs, though not as extensive as in some tropical regions, provide habitats for a variety of fish and other marine species. The health of these marine environments is tied to the sustainability of fishing, a vital part of both the economy and the food supply. Overall, the nature and landscape of Cape Verde are defined by contrasts. High peaks and flat plains, green valleys and arid plateaus, long sandy beaches and rocky headlands. They are also defined by the constant presence of the ocean, which not only surrounds the islands but shapes their weather, erodes their coasts, and provides much of their food. In a small country, these natural features are close at hand. Wherever you are, the sea is never far away, and the shape of the land is something you can see and feel in your daily life. Climate, geography, and nature. Cape Verde is an archipelago of volcanic islands lying in the central Atlantic Ocean, roughly 570 kilometers west of the coast of West Africa. It consists of 10 main islands and a number of smaller islets, divided into two distinct groups. The Barlavento, or Windward Islands, include Santo Anteo, São Vicente, Santa Luzia, São Nicolau, Sal, and Boa Vista. The Sotavento, or Leeward Islands, are made up of Maio, Santiago, Fogo, and Brava. Although the total land area is small, each island has its own combination of terrain, vegetation, and human settlement patterns, creating a surprising variety of landscapes within one country. All of the islands were formed by volcanic activity, and this geological history still shapes them today. The most striking volcanic feature is Pico do Fogo, which rises to 2,829 meters and dominates the skyline of Fogo Island. This volcano remains active, with its most recent eruption in 2014 to 2015 destroying part of a village, but also creating new landforms. On some islands, the volcanic soils are fertile and support agriculture, while on others the rugged terrain and aridity make cultivation challenging. The coastlines vary widely. Sal and Boa Vista have long stretches of sandy beaches that attract most of the country's resort tourism, while the steeper, mountainous islands such as Santo Anteo and Fogo offer dramatic cliffs and rocky shores. The surrounding sea is deep and lacks an extensive continental shelf, influencing both fishing practices and the marine ecosystems found here. Cape Verde's climate is one of its defining features. Lying between the Tropic of Cancer and about 14 degrees north latitude, it is firmly in the tropics but does not have the lush, wet climate some might expect. Instead, the islands have a dry, semi-arid climate moderated by the surrounding ocean and dominated by the northeast trade winds. These steady winds carry relatively cool, dry air for much of the year, keeping temperatures mild by tropical standards. Average daytime highs range from the low to mid-20s Celsius in the cooler months, roughly December to March, to around 30 degrees Celsius in the warmer months from July to September. Nights are generally comfortable, and extreme heat is rare thanks to the ocean's moderating influence. Rainfall is low and highly irregular. Most islands receive less than 250 millimeters per year, concentrated in a short season between August and October. Even then, the rain often comes in brief, intense showers. Years of drought are common and have shaped life on the islands for centuries, sometimes contributing to famine in the past. The variation between islands can be striking. Mountainous Santo Anteo, for example, can capture more moisture through orographic lift, creating green valleys even when surrounding areas are dry, while flatter islands like Sal remain arid year-round. Humidity is generally low, which makes the warmth more pleasant than in many tropical regions. The constant winds provide natural cooling, though they can sometimes be strong enough to lift dust and sand. Occasionally, Cape Verde experiences the bruma seca, or dry haze, when fine dust from the Sahara Desert is carried over the ocean, turning the sky hazy and reducing visibility. Storms are relatively rare, but the islands do sit in a zone where tropical weather systems can form in late summer. Some disturbances near Cape Verde travel westward and grow into major hurricanes affecting the Caribbean or North America. Meteorologists even use the term Cape Verde-type hurricane for such storms. Locally, these systems may bring heavy rain and gusty winds, but direct hits from full-strength hurricanes are uncommon. Water scarcity is a constant challenge. There are no large permanent rivers or lakes. Streams flow only in the brief rainy season. Groundwater is an important source but can be overused, leading to salinization in coastal aquifers. In response, Cape Verde has developed desalination plants, rainwater harvesting, and drip irrigation systems to make the most of limited supplies. Reforestation projects, planting drought-resistant trees like acacias and eucalyptus, aim to reduce erosion, improve water retention, and restore some of the vegetation lost over centuries. Wildlife on the islands reflects both isolation and adaptation. There are no large native land mammals, but birdlife is rich, with several endemic species such as the Rosso lark and the Cape Verde warbler. The surrounding waters are biodiverse, home to tuna, groupers, and migratory species like humpback whales. Certain beaches, especially on Boa Vista, are important nesting sites for loggerhead turtles, making conservation a significant part of environmental policy. Protected areas, including Fogo Natural Park and Serra Malagada Natural Park, preserve both terrestrial and marine habitats. These spaces are not only important for biodiversity, but also for tourism, research, and education. The balance between human use and environmental protection is delicate, as agriculture, fishing, and tourism all depend on the health of natural systems. Climate change adds another layer of uncertainty. Shifts in rainfall patterns could make droughts more frequent or severe, and rising sea levels may threaten low-lying coastal areas. Stronger storms, if they become more common, could damage infrastructure and ecosystems. The government's stability and its investments in renewable energy and water management provide some resilience, but the physical realities of geography and climate will remain central to the country's future. In the end, Cape Verde's climate, geography, and nature together form a story of contrasts, between arid plains and green valleys, between volcanic slopes and sandy beaches, between constancy in temperature and unpredictability in rainfall. For residents, this shapes the rhythm of the year and the patterns of work and leisure. For visitors, it creates a distinct environment that is neither quite like West Africa nor entirely like other Atlantic islands, but something recognizably and uniquely Cape Verdean. Area, population, and demographics. Cape Verde is, in geographical terms, a small country. Its total land area is about 4,033 square kilometers. To put that into perspective, it is smaller than many of the world's large cities if you measure only the urban area. It is about the size of the Faroe Islands, slightly larger than Luxembourg, and significantly smaller than countries like Trinidad and Tobago or the U.S. state of Rhode Island. Yet, as with many island nations, size in square kilometers does not fully capture the experience of space. In Cape Verde, the land is divided into 10 main islands, separated by stretches of ocean that, while not vast in a continental sense, still give each island a certain degree of separation and independence in daily life. The population of Cape Verde is around 560,000 people, based on recent estimates. This places it well below the 100 most populous countries in the world. Its population is comparable to that of small nations such as Luxembourg, Montenegro, or the Solomon Islands. For a country of its size, Cape Verde has a moderate population density overall, roughly 139 people per square kilometer. But the reality on the ground varies significantly from one island to another. The most populous island is Santiago, which is home to the capital, Praia, and nearly half of the country's total population. Santiago is the political, economic, and administrative center of Cape Verde, and its larger towns and more developed infrastructure attract people from other islands seeking work or education. The second most populous urban area is Mindelo, on the island of São Vicente, which serves as a cultural and commercial hub for the northern islands. Other islands have much smaller populations, some with only a few thousand residents, and in the case of Santa Luzia, none at all. It remains uninhabited. Urbanization in Cape Verde has increased over the decades, with more people moving to towns and cities in search of opportunities. However, rural communities remain important, particularly in areas where agriculture or fishing are the main livelihoods. These rural areas often have strong local identities and traditions, shaped by the landscape and by the relative isolation that comes with living on a smaller island or in a remote part of a larger one. One striking feature of Cape Verde's demography is that a significant portion of the people who consider themselves Cape Verdean do not live in the country at all. Estimates suggest that more Cape Verdeans live abroad than on the islands themselves. The largest diaspora communities are in Portugal, the United States, particularly in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, France, the Netherlands, and parts of West Africa. This long-standing pattern of emigration has deep historical roots, linked to economic opportunities abroad and the limited resources at home. It has also created a constant flow of remittances, which are an important part of the country's economy and a sense of cultural connection that spans oceans. The age structure of Cape Verde's population reflects both its development level and its migration patterns. The median age is in the mid to late 20s, which is younger than in most European countries, but older than in many sub-Saharan African nations. This relative youthfulness means that the working-age population is substantial, but it also means that job creation is an ongoing challenge. Education levels have improved markedly since independence, and literacy rates are high by regional standards. But the opportunities available domestically do not always match the skills of young graduates, leading some to seek careers abroad. In terms of gender distribution, the balance is close to equal, though the effects of migration can create imbalances in certain areas. For example, in some rural communities, younger men may be more likely to migrate for work, leaving a higher proportion of women in the local population. This, in turn, influences the social and economic life of those communities. Life expectancy in Cape Verde is around 73 years, which is relatively high compared to many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. This reflects improvements in healthcare, access to clean water, and nutrition over recent decades. Infant mortality has declined sharply, and vaccination programs have been successful in reducing the prevalence of certain diseases. These indicators contribute to the country's relatively strong ranking on the Human Development Index, although there are still disparities in access to healthcare between urban and rural areas. Ethnically, Cape Verde's population is a blend, the result of centuries of interaction between African and European peoples. The earliest permanent inhabitants were Portuguese settlers and enslaved Africans brought from the mainland, and over time, a mixed Creole identity emerged. Today, Cape Verdeans generally identify as such regardless of their exact ancestry, and the shared language, culture, and history bind the population together. Language is a central part of this identity. Portuguese is the official language, used in government, education, and media. Cape Verdean Creole, or Kriolu, is spoken in daily life, with variations between islands that can sometimes be significant enough for native speakers to notice immediately where someone is from. These variations are a source of local pride and cultural richness, as well as an example of how geography and separation have shaped the population over time. Religion also plays a role in the country's social fabric, though it is more a matter of cultural heritage than political identity. The majority of Cape Verdeans are Roman Catholic, a legacy of Portuguese colonization, but there are also Protestant communities and smaller groups of other faiths. Religious festivals and traditions are part of the social calendar and can vary between islands, reflecting local histories and influences. Population growth in Cape Verde is moderate, with a steady but not rapid increase in recent years. The effects of migration mean that growth in the resident population is slower than it might otherwise be, and in some rural areas, the population may even be declining as younger generations move to cities or abroad. This movement has implications for local economies, for the maintenance of traditional practices, and for the use of land and resources. All of these demographic characteristics, the modest size, the concentration in a few urban centers, the large diaspora, the mixed heritage, and the linguistic and cultural unity, combine to create a population that is both closely tied to its home islands and spread widely across the world. Cape Verde's people are at once rooted and mobile, connected by family, history, and a shared sense of identity that spans far beyond the physical boundaries of the country. Language, culture, and daily life. Cape Verde's cultural identity has been shaped by centuries of blending of languages, of customs, of ways of living that have come together as a result of the island's location at the crossroads of Atlantic travel and trade. From the earliest days of settlement in the 15th century, when Portuguese explorers established outposts and brought enslaved Africans from the mainland, the population developed a mixed heritage that is neither purely European nor purely African, but something distinctly its own. Over generations, these influences have merged into a Creole culture that is instantly recognizable to those who know it. A culture that exists in the rhythms of speech, the flavors of food, the sway of music, and the patterns of everyday life. Language sits at the heart of this identity. Portuguese is the official language of Cape Verde. It is the language used in government, the courts, the education system, and in most formal writing. It links the country to the wider Lusophone world, to Portugal, Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, and other Portuguese-speaking nations. In newspapers, in official announcements, in the classroom, Portuguese is dominant. Yet, for most Cape Verdeans, it is not the language they grow up speaking at home. That role belongs to Cape Verdean Creole, known locally as Kriolu. Kriolu is a family of closely related Creole languages, with each island having its own variant. The vocabulary is largely drawn from Portuguese, but its grammar, pronunciation, and idioms are heavily influenced by West African languages and the creativity of generations who adapted their speech to new realities. For many, Kriolu is the first language learned in childhood. It is the language of the home, the market, the fishing harbor, the music stage, and the public square. The differences between island varieties are distinct enough that a person's origins can often be guessed after only a few sentences. These variations are a source of local pride, much like regional accents elsewhere in the world. In recent years, there has been growing discussion about giving Kriolu more formal recognition, and some efforts to standardize it for education and written use. This reflects a deeper cultural conversation about identity, about how Cape Verde presents itself to the world and how it balances its European heritage with its African roots. The coexistence of Portuguese and Kriolu is a visible symbol of this balance, showing how two different traditions can exist side by side, influencing and reinforcing each other. Music is perhaps Cape Verde's most famous cultural export. The style most often associated with the country is morna, a slow, melodic, and often melancholic form of music, sometimes compared to the Portuguese fado or the blues. Sung most often in Kriolu, morna speaks of longing, love, and the bittersweet ache of saudade, a word for deep nostalgia. Cesaria Evora, known internationally as the Barefoot Diva, brought morna to the attention of audiences around the world. Her warm, unhurried voice, often accompanied by guitar, violin, and cavaquinho, conveyed both the intimacy of island life and the vast distances crossed by Cape Verdeans living abroad. But morna is just one part of Cape Verde's musical landscape. Caladira is more upbeat and danceable, often telling humorous or satirical stories. Funana, driven by the accordion and percussion, carries a quick, insistent rhythm rooted in African traditions. Once discouraged under colonial rule for being too African, Funana is now a proud symbol of national heritage. Batuk, one of the oldest forms, is performed in groups, often by women, with drums, hand claps, and call-and-response singing. Each style is accompanied by its own dances, the slow, graceful sway of morna, the lively steps of Funana, the communal energy of Batuk. These dances are learned informally, passed from generation to generation, and are as much a part of social life as the music itself. Food tells a similar story of blending. The national dish, cachupa, is a slow-cooked stew of maize, beans, vegetables, and either fish or meat, with endless regional and family variations. In rural areas, the simpler cachupa pobre may be prepared with fewer ingredients, while in urban centers or for special occasions, it might include pork, sausage, or tuna. Grilled fish is a common staple, served with rice and beans, while salted cod or bacalhau, a legacy of Portuguese cuisine, remains popular. Pastel com diablo dentro, a fried pastry filled with spicy tuna, is a favorite snack. Tropical fruits like papaya, mango, and banana appear when in season, though limited local production means many are imported. Meals are social events, even when simple, and often accompanied by conversation, music, and the easy pace of island life. Religion plays a significant role in cultural life. Roman Catholicism, brought by the Portuguese, is the predominant faith, and churches can be found in towns and villages across the islands. Religious holidays mark the calendar. Easter, Christmas, and Saints' Days are observed with a mixture of solemnity and festivity. These events often blend formal church services with music, dancing, and feasting. Carnival, particularly in Mindelo on São Vicente, is one of the most anticipated celebrations of the year. Parades fill the streets with music, elaborate costumes, and an atmosphere of joy that draws both locals and visitors. Daily life varies from island to island and between urban and rural settings. In cities like Praia and Mindelo, life is shaped by government offices, schools, markets, shops, and tourism. Streets are busy, markets are filled with fresh fish, vegetables, and imported goods, and public transportation, often in the form of minibuses or shared taxis, keeps people moving. On smaller islands and in rural areas, the pace is slower, with livelihoods centered on fishing, small-scale farming, and seasonal work. The extended family is an important social unit, and it is common for multiple generations to live in the same household or in close proximity. The Cape Verdean diaspora has left its mark on daily life. With more Cape Verdeans living abroad than on the islands themselves, migration is a constant theme. Families receive remittances from relatives overseas, and visits from abroad often bring new fashions, ideas, and music. The sense of belonging extends beyond the islands, encompassing communities in Lisbon, Boston, Rotterdam, and elsewhere. Yet the ties to a specific island, and often to a particular town or village, remain strong. Leisure time is often centered on social interaction. Football is the most popular sport to watch and play, with informal games taking place in fields, schoolyards, and open spaces. Evenings might be spent in cafes, bars, or in public squares, where music plays and conversation drifts into the night. Card games, storytelling, and simply sitting together in the cool evening air are common pastimes. Education is valued, and many parents encourage their children to pursue studies abroad if local opportunities are limited. Those who return bring back skills and experiences, contributing to the ongoing evolution of Cape Verde's culture. Those who remain abroad often maintain close ties through visits and digital communication, continuing the exchange of ideas and traditions. In all these ways, through language, music, food, religion, daily routines, and the ongoing connection with a global diaspora, Cape Verde's culture is both rooted and dynamic. It preserves traditions while adapting to change, just as the islands themselves stand anchored in the Atlantic while connected to the wider currents of the world. Religion, ethnic groups, and society. Cape Verde's social fabric is woven from threads of history, migration, and cultural blending, and its religious and ethnic composition reflects that layered past. The islands were uninhabited before the arrival of the Portuguese in the 15th century, so there is no pre-colonial indigenous population. Instead, the society that developed was built from the interactions between European settlers, mainly from Portugal, and enslaved Africans brought from the West African coast. Over time, these populations mixed, not only biologically but culturally, creating a Creole identity that is now central to Cape Verdean self-understanding. Religion in Cape Verde is predominantly Christian, and more specifically Roman Catholic. This is a direct legacy of Portuguese colonization, as Catholicism was introduced alongside Portuguese governance, education, and legal systems. Today, Catholic churches are present on all the inhabited islands, and Catholic rituals and festivals mark the annual calendar. These festivals often blend religious and local cultural elements. A Saints' Day might be celebrated not only with a Mass, but also with music, dancing, and shared meals that bring together the whole community. Protestantism also has a significant presence, particularly through the Church of the Nazarene, which arrived in the early 20th century, largely via Cape Verdeans returning from work abroad in the United States. Other Protestant denominations, such as Seventh-day Adventists and Pentecostals, are also represented. These communities are often active in education, healthcare, and social support, running schools, clinics, and outreach programs. While Islam and other world religions are not widespread, there are small communities of Muslims, often connected to more recent immigration from West Africa and individuals of other faiths or no faith at all. Religious tolerance is generally strong, and Cape Verde's constitution guarantees freedom of religion. Public life is not dominated by religious discourse, but religious institutions remain important in community life, particularly in rural areas where the church or chapel is often a focal point for gatherings. Ethnic composition in Cape Verde is relatively homogeneous in the sense that most people identify as Cape Verdean rather than aligning themselves with distinct ethnic categories. The majority of the population is of mixed African and European ancestry, a blending that occurred over centuries. The African heritage comes largely from regions of today's Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau, while the European heritage is mainly Portuguese. This mixture is visible in physical appearance, but perhaps more importantly, it is embedded in cultural practices, language, and shared history. The idea of a Cape Verdean identity that transcends ethnic divisions is a point of pride for many, especially given that ethnic divisions have caused conflict in other parts of the world. In Cape Verde, the unifying factors are language, particularly the use of Kriolu in daily life, and a sense of belonging to the islands, even among those who live abroad. This does not mean that all differences have disappeared. Local identity is strong, with people often identifying first with their home island and then with the nation as a whole. Friendly rivalries between islands, especially in sports or music competitions, are common, but they are part of the fabric of unity rather than a source of deep division. Society in Cape Verde is shaped by its small scale, both geographically and demographically. This smallness has advantages. Communities are close-knit, and social networks can be strong. Families are often extended, with connections spanning multiple households and even multiple countries, given the large diaspora. It is not unusual for someone to have close relatives in Portugal, the United States, or France, and to maintain regular contact across these distances. Family life is central to social organization. In many households, grandparents, parents, and children live under one roof or in close proximity. Responsibilities are shared, and decisions about work, education, or migration are often made collectively. The role of women in Cape Verdean society is notable. Women frequently manage households, participate in the workforce, and hold positions in business and politics. This has historical roots, as men often migrated for work, leaving women to manage farms, businesses, and family affairs. Community events play a significant role in maintaining social cohesion. Religious festivals, national holidays, and local celebrations are occasions when people gather in public spaces, share food, play music, and dance. Carnival, especially in Mindelo, is perhaps the most famous example, attracting visitors from other islands and from abroad. In rural areas, smaller-scale gatherings for weddings, baptisms, and other life events are equally important. Education is valued highly, and literacy rates are among the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. School attendance is compulsory for children between the ages of 6 and 14, and both boys and girls have access to education. Secondary and higher education opportunities have expanded in recent decades, though many students still pursue advanced studies abroad. The return of these graduates brings new ideas and skills into Cape Verdean society, while those who remain abroad contribute through remittances and professional networks. In terms of social challenges, Cape Verde faces some of the same issues as other small island nations. The economy does not provide enough high-quality jobs for all, especially for young people with higher education. This can lead to underemployment or to migration. There are also disparities between islands. Those with better transport links and tourism infrastructure tend to have more opportunities, while smaller, more remote islands may struggle with limited services and slower economic growth. Crime rates in Cape Verde are low compared to many countries in the region, and violent crime is rare. Petty crime does exist, particularly in urban areas and tourist zones, but it is not a defining feature of daily life. Social stability is supported by effective governance, a tradition of democratic politics since the early 1990s, and the cultural importance placed on community and family. One of the most striking aspects of Cape Verdean society is the way it extends beyond the islands themselves. The diaspora is not a separate category, but an integral part of the national community. Cape Verdeans abroad vote in elections, send money home, and participate in cultural events that keep their connection alive. In return, those on the islands follow the lives of family members abroad, share in their successes, and integrate influences from their host countries into Cape Verdean life. In summary, religion in Cape Verde provides a framework for many community events and personal values, but it does not dominate politics or public life. Ethnic identity is largely subsumed within a shared Cape Verdean identity, one that celebrates its mixed heritage. Society is close-knit, outward-looking, and shaped by the constant movement of people and ideas between the islands and the wider world. This combination of rootedness and openness is one of the country's defining social strengths. Government and international relations. Cape Verde is a parliamentary representative democratic republic. In simple terms, this means that political power is divided between a head of state, the president, and a head of government, the prime minister, with legislative authority resting in a national assembly elected by the people. The system is based on the Constitution of 1992, which marked the country's transition from a one-party state to a multi-party democracy. That shift was significant, not just in legal terms, but also in the way it shaped the political culture. Since the early 1990s, Cape Verde has earned a reputation as one of Africa's most stable and transparent democracies. The president is elected directly by the people for a 5-year term, with the possibility of re-election. The president's role is partly ceremonial, but also includes important constitutional powers, representing the nation abroad, serving as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and acting as a guarantor of the Constitution. The president can also mediate in political disputes and, in certain cases, dissolve parliament or call new elections. As of the most recent information, José Maria Neves holds the office, having been elected in 2021 after a long career in politics, including time as prime minister. The prime minister is appointed by the president, but in practice must be the leader of the party or coalition that holds a majority in the National Assembly. The Prime Minister directs government policy, oversees the cabinet of ministers, and is responsible for day-to-day governance. This includes areas like economic planning, infrastructure, education, and foreign affairs. The National Assembly, Asamblea Nacional, is a unicameral legislature, meaning it has just one chamber. Members are elected every 5 years through a system of proportional representation, which encourages multiple parties to compete and ensures that even smaller parties can gain seats if they receive enough votes. Political competition in Cape Verde is largely between two major parties: the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde, PAICV, which grew out of the independence movement, and the Movement for Democracy, MPD, which emerged in the early 1990s advocating for multi-party democracy and economic liberalization. Power has alternated peacefully between these parties over the years, a hallmark of the country's democratic stability. The judicial system in Cape Verde is independent, as stated in the Constitution. The courts include a Supreme Court of Justice, appellate courts, and local courts. While the judiciary has relatively limited resources, it operates without overt political interference, and the rule of law is generally respected. This independence is one of the reasons Cape Verde ranks well on international governance and transparency indices. At the local level, the country is divided into municipalities, each with its own elected council and mayor. These local governments are responsible for matters such as waste collection, local roads, and community services. Given the geographical separation of the islands, local governance plays an important role in ensuring that policies are adapted to the specific needs of each community. Civil society is active in Cape Verde. Non-governmental organizations, community associations, and professional groups operate freely, contributing to debates on policy, advocating for social issues, and providing services in areas like health, education, and environmental protection. Press freedom is respected, and journalists work without the level of political pressure seen in some other countries. On the international stage, Cape Verde maintains a network of diplomatic relationships that reflect both its history and its strategic interests. As a member of the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, CPLP, it shares a linguistic and cultural bond with other Lusophone nations. This connection facilitates cooperation in areas like education, trade, and cultural exchange. Portugal remains a close partner, providing development aid, investment, and a platform for Cape Verdeans living abroad. Cape Verde is also a member of the African Union, AU, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and various UN agencies. Within ECOWAS, the country participates in regional initiatives on trade, security, and infrastructure, though its island geography means it is not physically connected to most of the projects aimed at overland transport. Relations with the European Union are particularly important. Cape Verde has a special partnership agreement with the EU signed in 2007, which covers political dialogue, security cooperation, development aid, and support for governance reforms. The EU is a major source of funding for infrastructure, renewable energy projects, and social programs. The United States is another key partner, especially because of the large Cape Verdean American community. Relations are strengthened by development assistance programs, such as those under the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which have focused on improving water supply, sanitation, and land management. The diaspora also plays a role in connecting the two countries culturally and economically. Cape Verde's foreign policy emphasizes diplomacy, peaceful resolution of disputes, and multilateral cooperation. The country positions itself as a bridge between Africa, Europe, and the Americas, not just geographically, but politically and culturally. Its location along transatlantic shipping and air routes also gives it strategic significance, particularly for maritime security in the Atlantic. Cape Verde participates in international efforts to combat piracy, illegal fishing, and drug trafficking, often working with partners such as Portugal, Spain, and the United States. In the area of development policy, Cape Verde has used its stable governance to attract international aid and investment. However, as it has transitioned from low-income to middle-income status, some donors have reduced their contributions, challenging the government to find new sources of funding. This shift has encouraged a focus on sustainable economic growth, tourism, renewable energy, and the blue economy, using the country's maritime resources in a sustainable way. Military and security forces in Cape Verde are small, reflecting the country's size and peaceful foreign policy. The armed forces include the Army, Coast Guard, and National Guard. Their main tasks are border security, maritime patrol, and disaster response, rather than offensive military operations. Cape Verde participates in UN peacekeeping missions and cooperates with regional partners on security training and exercises. Overall, Cape Verde's government operates within a framework that values stability, the rule of law, and respect for democratic norms. Its international relations reflect a balance between regional commitments in Africa, cultural and linguistic ties to the Portuguese-speaking world, and strategic partnerships with Europe and the Americas. The country's reputation for good governance is one of its most valuable assets, helping it to maintain a voice in international forums that is larger than its geographic size might suggest. Economy and living standards. Cape Verde's economy is small, open, and service-oriented. Its size is determined not only by the country's limited land area and natural resources, but also by the constraints of being an island nation in the mid-Atlantic. Almost everything, from fuel to many types of food, must be imported. This creates high transportation costs and makes the economy sensitive to fluctuations in global prices. Yet within those limits, Cape Verde has developed a relatively diverse set of income sources and a standard of living that is above the average for much of sub-Saharan Africa. The gross domestic product, GDP, of Cape Verde places it firmly in the category of a small middle-income country. Services dominate the economy, accounting for over 70% of GDP. Tourism is the largest single contributor within that sector, followed by trade, transport, and public services. The island's beaches, mild climate, and political stability make them attractive to visitors, especially from Europe, and tourism has been a driver of infrastructure development, including hotels, roads, and airports. Tourism is concentrated on a few islands, particularly Sal and Boa Vista, which have extensive resort facilities and long sandy beaches. Santiago, with the capital Praia, attracts visitors interested in culture and history, while São Vicente draws those looking for music, festivals, and a more urban experience. Fogo and Santo Anteo appeal to hikers and nature enthusiasts. This diversity of tourism products helps spread benefits, but the sector is still vulnerable to external shocks, such as economic downturns in source markets or global events that disrupt travel. The COVID-19 pandemic illustrated this vulnerability, as tourism arrivals dropped sharply and the economic impact was felt across many sectors. Fisheries are another important part of the economy. The waters around Cape Verde are rich in marine life, and fishing supports both local consumption and exports, particularly of tuna. Most fishing is small-scale and artisanal, but there are also industrial operations. The challenge for the sector is sustainability. Overfishing and illegal fishing by foreign vessels are persistent concerns. The government has worked with international partners to improve monitoring and enforcement in its exclusive economic zone. Agriculture plays a relatively small role in GDP, but it is important for livelihoods in rural areas. The dry climate and limited arable land mean that farming is often subsistence-oriented, focused on crops like maize, beans, sweet potatoes, cassava, and various vegetables. Coffee and wine are produced in certain microclimates, particularly on Fogo, where volcanic soil provides fertile ground. Irrigation is necessary in many places, and water scarcity limits the expansion of agriculture. One of the most significant sources of income for Cape Verde is remittances, money sent home by Cape Verdeans living abroad. The diaspora's contributions are not just economic. They also provide social support, finance community projects, and help families invest in education and housing. Remittances can account for around 10% of GDP in some years, acting as a stabilizing force when other sectors face difficulties. The industrial sector in Cape Verde is small, focusing mainly on light manufacturing, such as food processing, beverages, and textiles. There are also some ship repair facilities and small-scale production of construction materials. The country has sought to attract investment in renewable energy technology and other industries that can operate in a small market environment. In recent years, Cape Verde has made significant progress in developing renewable energy. Wind farms and solar installations now provide a substantial share of electricity, reducing dependence on imported fossil fuels. The government has set ambitious targets for increasing the share of renewables in the national energy mix, aiming to improve both energy security and environmental sustainability. Infrastructure development has been a priority, supported by international aid and loans. Roads, ports, and airports have been upgraded, and telecommunications coverage is extensive, with mobile networks reaching most of the population. Internet access is improving, though speeds and affordability still vary. Inter-island transport remains a challenge. While there are domestic flights and ferries, schedules and reliability can be affected by weather and maintenance issues. Living standards in Cape Verde are relatively high compared to many African nations. Life expectancy is around 73 years, and literacy rates are among the highest in the region. Education is free and compulsory until the age of 14, and there has been a steady increase in secondary and higher education enrollment. Healthcare services are available on all inhabited islands, though more specialized treatment may require travel to larger islands or abroad. Housing conditions vary widely. In urban areas, especially in Praia and Mindelo, there is a mix of modern apartment buildings, traditional houses, and informal settlements. Access to electricity and clean water is widespread in towns, but less consistent in rural areas. Many households rely on rainwater collection or communal taps, and water shortages can occur in dry years. Poverty still exists, particularly in rural communities and on smaller islands with fewer economic opportunities. The government and international partners run programs to support vulnerable populations, improve social housing, and create jobs. Social protection systems, while limited in scope, provide some assistance for the elderly, disabled, and low-income families. Economically, Cape Verde's small domestic market means it must look outward. Trade agreements with the European Union, ECOWAS, and other partners help provide access to larger markets. The country has also promoted itself as a potential hub for shipping, aviation, and services in the mid-Atlantic, leveraging its location between continents. One of the key economic challenges is diversification. Heavy reliance on tourism and remittances leaves the economy exposed to external factors beyond its control. Diversifying into renewable energy, fisheries, niche agriculture, and technology-based services is seen as essential for long-term resilience. Investment in education and vocational training is part of this strategy, aiming to equip the workforce with skills suited to a changing economy. Despite its vulnerabilities, Cape Verde has built a reputation for good economic governance. Transparency, respect for contracts, and relative political stability have helped attract investment and maintain donor confidence. The country's upgrade to middle-income status in 2007 was a recognition of this progress, though it also meant reduced access to certain forms of concessional aid. In short, Cape Verde's economy is small but resilient, shaped by the realities of its geography and its history. Its living standards reflect decades of steady improvement, even as challenges remain. The balance between opportunity and vulnerability is a constant theme. The same openness that connects Cape Verde to the world also makes it sensitive to the world's changes. Managing that balance, through diversification, sustainability, and human development, will be central to the country's economic future. History before and after colonization. Cape Verde's history is in some ways unusual among African nations, because the islands had no permanent human population before the arrival of Europeans in the 15th century. This absence of an indigenous society meant that the history of Cape Verde, at least in recorded terms, begins relatively late compared to other parts of the continent. The earliest known accounts come from Portuguese explorers in the 1450s, during the Age of Discovery, when European seafarers were pushing further down the coast of West Africa in search of new trade routes, resources, and opportunities. The Portuguese, along with Genoese navigators in their service, came across the islands around 1456. Accounts differ slightly on who exactly set foot on which island first, but what is clear is that the islands were uninhabited. They were soon claimed for the Portuguese crown, and permanent settlement began a few years later. The first settlers were a mix of Portuguese colonists and enslaved Africans brought from the nearby mainland. These enslaved people were taken from areas corresponding to present-day Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. From the start, Cape Verde's position in the Atlantic gave it a strategic importance. The islands lay along the emerging trade routes between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. This made them a natural stopover for ships needing to resupply with fresh water, food, or other provisions. But more darkly, it also positioned Cape Verde as a key node in the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans were brought to the islands, sometimes held there temporarily, before being shipped onward to the Americas. Some remained in Cape Verde, working in agriculture or domestic service, and over time, the population became increasingly mixed in ancestry and culture. During the early colonial period, the economy was based on agriculture, livestock, and trade. Crops such as cotton and sugarcane were introduced, and salt became an important export. However, the island's climate, characterized by irregular rainfall, made agriculture precarious. Periods of drought were frequent, and these often led to food shortages. In times of scarcity, famine could devastate the population. The colonial authorities did not always provide adequate relief, and in some cases, famine deaths were compounded by the export of food to Europe or other colonies. The islands were not only a point of transit for goods and people, but also a cultural crossroads. Portuguese became the language of administration and the church, while African languages and traditions persisted among the enslaved population. Over generations, these influences blended into a Creole culture distinct from both Portugal and West Africa. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Cape Verde continued to serve as a maritime hub, but it also faced challenges from piracy and foreign competition. Ships from England, France, and the Netherlands sometimes raided the islands, especially during times when those nations were at war with Portugal. Local defenses were limited, and some smaller settlements were abandoned after repeated attacks. By the 19th century, the global context was changing. The transatlantic slave trade was gradually abolished, and Cape Verde's role in it came to an end. This forced an economic shift toward other activities: salt production, fishing, and service as a coaling station for steamships crossing the Atlantic. The island's location remained an advantage, but economic development was slow, and droughts continued to cause hardship. It was also during the 19th century that significant emigration began. Cape Verdeans left for work opportunities in New England, the Caribbean, and later in West Africa and Europe. These migration patterns would become a defining feature of Cape Verdean history and society, creating a diaspora that today outnumbers the population living on the islands. In the 20th century, Cape Verde remained under Portuguese colonial rule. The islands were considered part of Portugal's overseas provinces, rather than a separate colony, which in theory meant they had a closer political connection to the metropole. In practice, however, economic inequality, limited political representation, and a lack of investment in infrastructure persisted. Cape Verde's people were Portuguese citizens, but their opportunities were limited compared to those in Europe. The independence movement in Cape Verde was closely tied to that in Guinea-Bissau, another Portuguese territory on the West African mainland. The African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIC, founded in 1956 by Amilcar Cabral and others, aimed to achieve independence for both territories as a single nation. The reasoning was partly geographic. The two were relatively close, and partly strategic, as a united front was stronger in negotiations and in armed struggle. The war for independence was fought primarily in Guinea-Bissau, as Cape Verde did not have the terrain or resources for a guerrilla conflict of the same kind. Nevertheless, Cape Verdeans played an important role in the movement, both in leadership and in international advocacy. The Carnation Revolution in Portugal in April 1974, a military coup that overthrew the dictatorship in Lisbon, brought a sudden end to colonial wars and opened the way for negotiations. Cape Verde gained independence peacefully on July 5, 1975. The first president, Aristides Pereira, and the Praia government initially pursued the idea of unification with Guinea-Bissau, but political differences and a coup in Guinea-Bissau in 1980 led to a split. From that point on, the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde, PAICV, governed the country as a one-party state. The post-independence period was marked by efforts to build a national economy and identity, but also by the ongoing challenges of drought, limited resources, and dependence on foreign aid and remittances. Education and healthcare were priorities, and literacy rates rose sharply. However, political freedoms were limited under the one-party system. In 1991, Cape Verde transitioned to a multi-party democracy after constitutional reforms and free elections. The Movement for Democracy, MPD, won the first multi-party elections, beginning a pattern of peaceful transfers of power that has continued to the present day. This democratic stability has been one of Cape Verde's most significant achievements since independence. Today, Cape Verde's history is remembered in many ways: in place names, in monuments, in music, and in the continued connection between the islands and the wider world. The story of the country is one of adaptation. From an uninhabited set of islands to a colonial hub of trade and slavery, to a modern independent nation navigating the opportunities and constraints of its geography. It is also a story deeply shaped by the sea. The Atlantic has been both a barrier and a bridge, separating the islands from the mainland, but linking them to faraway places in Europe, the Americas, and beyond. Recent history and current situation. Cape Verde's recent history is defined by a period of political stability, gradual economic development, and a continued balancing act between the opportunities and challenges of its geography. Since the early 1990s, the country has stood out among African nations for its commitment to multi-party democracy, peaceful political transitions, and respect for civil liberties. This reputation has been a key part of Cape Verde's national identity and its international standing. After the adoption of a multi-party system in 1990 and the first democratic elections in 1991, Cape Verde entered a new phase. The Movement for Democracy, MPD, won those first elections, ending the one-party dominance of the African Party for the Independence of Cape Verde, PAICV. Since then, political power has alternated between these two parties, with each changeover happening through free and fair elections. This alternation has reinforced the public's trust in democratic institutions and has given the country a sense of predictability in governance. The 2000s saw a focus on improving infrastructure, modernizing public services, and developing the tourism sector. Roads, ports, and airports were upgraded, new hotels were built, and the government promoted Cape Verde as a safe and attractive destination for European travelers. The islands of Sal and Boa Vista became major resort hubs, while Santiago, São Vicente, and others aimed to attract visitors interested in culture, music, and nature. At the same time, the country invested in education and healthcare. Literacy rates, already high compared to many African nations, continued to improve, and access to primary healthcare expanded. Life expectancy increased, thanks to better medical services, vaccination programs, and improved water and sanitation in urban areas. Cape Verde's status was upgraded in 2007 when it moved from the UN's category of least developed countries to that of middle-income countries. This was an important milestone, signaling progress in living standards and economic performance. However, it also meant a gradual reduction in certain forms of concessional aid. For a country with limited natural resources and a reliance on imports, this created pressure to find new ways of sustaining development. The global financial crisis of 2008 had an impact on Cape Verde, largely through reduced tourism and a decline in remittances from the diaspora, as Cape Verdeans abroad faced job losses or reduced income. Still, the country weathered the storm relatively well, helped by its political stability and ongoing donor support. In the 2010s, attention increasingly turned to renewable energy and environmental sustainability. Wind farms and solar projects began to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels. Water management also became a priority, with investments in desalination plants and better storage systems to cope with the island's chronic water scarcity. Despite these achievements, challenges persisted. Unemployment, especially among young people, remained high. Economic opportunities were unevenly distributed between islands, with some benefiting much more from tourism and investment than others. The government worked to improve inter-island transport, but geography continued to limit integration. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 brought one of the most significant economic shocks in recent history. Tourism, which had been the largest contributor to GDP, collapsed almost overnight due to travel restrictions. Many hotels closed temporarily, and thousands of workers lost income. The government responded with emergency measures, including financial support for affected businesses and workers, but the impact was deep. GDP contracted sharply, and recovery has taken time. Vaccination campaigns and the gradual reopening of borders allowed tourism to restart in 2021 and 2022. The pace of recovery has varied by island and sector, but by the mid-2020s, arrivals were approaching pre-pandemic levels. The crisis also reinforced the importance of diversifying the economy to reduce dependence on a single sector. Politically, the most recent presidential election in 2021 brought José María Neves, a former prime minister from the PAICV, into the role of president. His election continued the pattern of alternation between the major parties and underlined the maturity of Cape Verde's democracy. Parliamentary elections have likewise been competitive but peaceful, with campaigns focusing on economic policy, job creation, and social services. Socially, Cape Verde continues to be shaped by its diaspora. Large communities in Portugal, the United States, France, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg remain closely connected to the islands. Remittances remain a crucial part of household income for many families, and cultural exchange between the diaspora and the homeland is constant. Internationally, Cape Verde has maintained and strengthened partnerships. Relations with the European Union remain central, particularly through the Special Partnership Agreement. Security cooperation with the United States and European nations has focused on maritime security, counter-narcotics operations, and search and rescue capabilities. Cape Verde's location in the Atlantic makes it a natural partner for such initiatives. Climate change has emerged as a growing concern in recent years. Rising sea levels, changing rainfall patterns, and more frequent extreme weather events all pose risks to the islands. The government has worked on adaptation measures, including coastal protection, water conservation, and renewable energy expansion, but the scale of the challenge is significant. Culturally, Cape Verde remains vibrant. Music festivals, particularly the Baía das Gatas Festival on São Vicente, continue to draw visitors and showcase the country's rich musical heritage. The legacy of Cesaria Evora is celebrated alongside new generations of artists blending traditional styles with global influences. As of today, Cape Verde finds itself at a crossroads familiar to many small island developing states. It enjoys political stability, relatively high living standards, and a strong cultural identity. But it also faces economic vulnerabilities, environmental challenges, and the ongoing need to ensure that development benefits all islands and communities. The country's recent history demonstrates a capacity for resilience, whether in adapting to the loss of colonial structures, navigating economic shocks, or managing the pandemic. The path forward will likely involve continuing to strengthen governance, diversifying the economy, and deepening connections with both regional and global partners. Travel and tourism. Traveling to Cape Verde is, for many visitors, a matter of entering a world that moves at a slightly different pace. The country's location in the central Atlantic, several hours' flight from mainland Europe or the west coast of Africa, gives it a sense of being both accessible and remote. For most tourists, the journey begins with an international flight to one of the main gateways: Amilcar Cabral International Airport on Sal, Aristides Pereira International Airport on Boa Vista, or Nelson Mandela International Airport on Santiago. Flights from Europe are frequent, with connections from Portugal, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Germany, and other countries. From North America, there are fewer direct links, and travelers often connect through Lisbon or other European hubs. Visa requirements depend on nationality. Citizens of the European Union, as well as several other countries, can enter without a visa for short stays, though registration and an airport security tax are required. Others may need to apply in advance. The process is relatively straightforward, but visitors are encouraged to check the latest regulations before travel. Once in Cape Verde, moving between islands can be part of the adventure or a source of logistical planning. Domestic flights connect the major islands, while ferries provide links for both passengers and cargo. Ferry schedules can be subject to delays due to weather or maintenance, so travelers often plan with flexibility in mind. For those wishing to explore more than one island, combining air and sea transport is common. Tourism in Cape Verde falls into two broad patterns. On one hand, there are the resort-based holidays, most often on Sal and Boa Vista, where visitors stay in large hotels or all-inclusive resorts, spend time on long sandy beaches, and perhaps take day trips to see local sites. On the other hand, there is the independent travel market, with visitors exploring islands like Santo Anteo for hiking, Fogo for its volcano, São Vicente for culture and nightlife, and Maio for quiet, undeveloped beaches. Sal is perhaps the most internationally recognized island for tourism. Its town of Santa Maria has a relaxed beachfront atmosphere, with restaurants, shops, and a pier where fishermen bring in their daily catch. Nearby, the salt flats of Pedra de Lume are a popular excursion, offering the chance to float in saline water in an extinct volcanic crater. Boa Vista, similarly, is known for its wide beaches and desert-like interior, attracting those looking for sun, windsurfing, and kite surfing. For travelers seeking landscapes and outdoor activity, Santo Anteo is a highlight. Accessible by ferry from São Vicente, it is known for dramatic mountains, deep valleys, and terraced farming landscapes. Hiking trails connect villages, and local goose houses provide a base for multi-day treks. The contrast between the green valleys in the wetter north and the arid south of the island offers a varied experience within a small area. Fogo offers a different kind of adventure, centered on Pico do Fogo, the country's highest volcano. Visitors can hike to the summit or explore the lava fields from recent eruptions. The village of Chá das Caldeiras, located inside the volcanic crater, is home to small-scale wine production, and tasting the local wine is often part of the visit. The volcanic landscape, combined with the hospitality of residents who have rebuilt after eruptions, makes this one of the most memorable stops for those interested in both nature and human resilience. Mindelo on São Vicente is Cape Verde's cultural capital. Its colorful colonial architecture, harbor views, and vibrant music scene attract visitors looking for a combination of urban charm and artistic energy. Music bars and cafes host live performances, and the city's annual carnival is one of the largest in the islands. Mindelo also serves as a convenient base for day trips or onward travel to Santo Anteo. Santiago, the largest island and home to the capital Praia, offers a mix of urban and rural experiences. The old city of Cidade Velha, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, was the first European colonial settlement in the tropics and has ruins of a fort, a cathedral, and a pillory from the era of the slave trade. Inland, markets, small villages, and agricultural landscapes show another side of the island. Praia itself has cultural venues, beaches, and a growing selection of restaurants and cafes. Maio and Brava are less visited, making them appealing to those looking for quiet escapes. Maio has long sandy beaches with few visitors, while Brava, known as the Island of Flowers, has cooler temperatures and lush vegetation in parts, attracting those seeking tranquility. Safety is generally good in Cape Verde, especially compared to many other destinations. Petty crimes such as pickpocketing can occur in urban areas, but violent crime against tourists is rare. Travelers are advised to take normal precautions, especially at night in less busy areas. The cost of travel varies depending on style and island. Resort stays can be comparable in price to mid-range European destinations, while local guest houses and family-run hotels offer more affordable options. Dining ranges from inexpensive street food and local restaurants to higher-end establishments serving both Cape Verdean and international cuisine. Imported goods tend to be more expensive, reflecting transport costs. Climate plays an important role in tourism patterns. The high season runs from November to April, when the weather is dry and temperatures are mild, making it ideal for beach holidays and outdoor activities. The months from August to October are warmer and can see more humidity and occasional rain, but this is also when some landscapes are greener. Windsurfers and kite surfers often prefer the windier months for their sports. Local culture is part of the tourist experience, whether through music performances, craft markets, or food. Visitors can buy handmade goods such as woven baskets, pottery, and textiles. Supporting local artisans is encouraged, as it helps keep traditional crafts alive and spreads tourism benefits beyond the main resorts. Food and drink are a highlight for many travelers. In addition to cachupa, fresh grilled fish is widely available, often served with rice, beans, and vegetables. Lobster and other seafood are seasonal specialties. Tropical fruits, when in season, add a sweet note to meals, and the local grog, a sugarcane spirit, is sometimes offered as a digestive. For those who enjoy nature-based tourism, Cape Verde offers whale watching, turtle nesting tours, and bird watching. Conservation projects often involve local communities and welcome visitors who want to learn more or contribute to environmental protection. Hiking, diving, and water sports are available on several islands, giving visitors a choice of activities beyond the beach. In the end, travel in Cape Verde is shaped by the diversity between islands. The experience of a week on Sal's beaches is very different from trekking on Santo Anteo or wandering the streets of Mindelo. Many visitors return to explore new islands, drawn by the combination of natural beauty, cultural richness, and the understated hospitality of Cape Verdeans. Fun facts and curiosities. Cape Verde, while small in both size and population, is full of details that reveal interesting aspects of its character, history, and place in the world. Some of these facts are connected to geography, others to culture, and some simply to the unusual or surprising ways the islands interact with the wider world. One of the most striking facts is that there are more Cape Verdeans living outside the country than inside it. Estimates suggest that the diaspora may be roughly twice the size of the population on the islands. This is the result of centuries of migration, driven by economic opportunities abroad and the limitations of resources at home. The largest communities abroad are in Portugal, the United States, especially in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, France, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. This diaspora plays a central role in the country's economy through remittances, but it also keeps cultural connections alive, with music, food, and language flowing in both directions. Cape Verde's location has long made it important in maritime history. Before modern air travel, the islands were a key refueling stop for ships crossing the Atlantic. In the age of steamships, ports like Mindelo became coaling stations where vessels took on fuel before continuing on their journeys. Even today, the country's ports serve as logistical points for shipping lanes between Africa, Europe, and the Americas. The island's volcanic origins mean that each one has its own distinct geological character. Fogo's active volcano is the most famous, but on other islands, older volcanic formations create dramatic cliffs, valleys, and plains. Some lava flows are so recent that they still appear almost untouched, their dark rock contrasting with the surrounding landscape. This diversity of terrain within a small national territory makes Cape Verde something of a natural geological museum. An unusual climatic fact is that Cape Verde occasionally experiences dust storms from the Sahara Desert, known locally as the bruma seca, or dry mist. These events occur when strong winds carry fine dust particles over the Atlantic from the African mainland. The sky can take on a yellow or reddish hue, visibility drops, and a fine layer of dust settles on surfaces. While it can be inconvenient, this phenomenon is also a reminder of the island's connection to the African continent despite being separated by hundreds of kilometers of ocean. In terms of culture, Cape Verde has produced music that has traveled far beyond its shores. Cesaria Evora, the best-known Cape Verdean singer, became an international star in the 1990s and early 2000s, performing barefoot on stage as a personal trademark. Her recordings brought the morna genre to global audiences and earned her a Grammy Award. Many other Cape Verdean musicians, such as Tito Paris, Myra Andrade, and Lura, have continued to blend traditional sounds with modern influences, gaining fans around the world. Sports are another part of Cape Verdean identity. Football is the most popular, and the national team, known as the Blue Sharks, has qualified for the Africa Cup of Nations several times, achieving notable victories against much larger nations. For a country with a population of around 500,000, competing on the continental stage is a source of pride. Some players of Cape Verdean descent, including those born abroad, have represented other national teams, for example, in Portugal and the Netherlands, but maintain strong ties to their heritage. Cape Verde also has a connection to global aviation history. Amilcar Cabral International Airport on Sal served for decades as a technical stop for transatlantic flights. Before modern long-range aircraft became common, many flights between Europe and South America landed in Cape Verde to refuel. This made the islands a meeting point for travelers from different continents and gave them a role in aviation that was larger than their size might suggest. In the field of renewable energy, Cape Verde has set ambitious goals. The country aims to produce a large share of its electricity from wind and solar sources, reducing dependence on imported fossil fuels. On some days, wind farms already supply the majority of the electricity on certain islands. This commitment to sustainability is driven by both economic and environmental reasons, as importing fuel is costly and the country is vulnerable to the effects of climate change. A curious detail about Cape Verde's flora and fauna is that the islands are home to several endemic species found nowhere else in the world. These include the Rosso lark, one of the rarest birds on the planet, which lives only on the uninhabited island of Rosso. Conservation efforts are in place to protect such species, and scientists visit regularly to monitor populations. Marine life is also rich, with the surrounding waters serving as breeding grounds for loggerhead turtles and humpback whales. The cuisine of Cape Verde reflects both tradition and adaptation. One small but notable fact is that cachupa, the national dish, is often eaten twice. First as a hearty stew for dinner, and then the leftovers are fried the next morning to make cachupa refogada, served with an egg or sausage for breakfast. This practice reflects both resourcefulness and the social importance of food as something that connects daily routines. Cape Verde's history is also linked to space exploration in an indirect way. Because of its equatorial proximity and open ocean surroundings, the area near the islands has been used for certain satellite tracking and maritime recovery operations. While there is no major space facility on the islands themselves, their location has given them occasional strategic importance in global projects. The naming of the country itself is a curiosity. Cape Verde means Green Cape in Portuguese, named after a headland on the Senegalese coast, Cape Verde, which early Portuguese explorers sighted before reaching the islands. The name was transferred to the islands, even though many of them are more brown and arid than green for much of the year. A final fact that visitors often notice is the way Cape Verde manages to be both connected and isolated. Its airports, seaports, and communication links keep it in touch with the wider world. But the small size of communities, the physical separation between islands, and the slower pace of life create a sense that things happen on island time. For many visitors, this is part of the charm. For residents, it is simply the rhythm of life. Together, these facts show that Cape Verde, while modest in its global profile, contains layers of history, nature, and culture that extend far beyond its shorelines. From music that moves audiences worldwide to the quiet nesting of turtles on a Boa Vista beach, from dusty winds carrying the Sahara across the sea to the laughter of children playing football in a Mindelo alley, the country is full of moments and details that, once noticed, tend to stay in the memory. As we come to the end of our slow and thorough exploration of Cape Verde, it is worth pausing to reflect on the various threads that together form the fabric of this island nation. We have moved through facts and figures, history and geography, daily life and cultural expression, and in each section there has been a recurring theme. Cape Verde is shaped by the meeting of different worlds. It stands at a literal crossroads in the Atlantic between Africa, Europe, and the Americas, and it also exists at a figurative crossroads where tradition and modernity meet, where isolation and connection coexist, and where resilience is a constant necessity. From a purely factual standpoint, Cape Verde is small, just over 500,000 people spread across 10 main islands and a scattering of islets. It has no vast mineral wealth, no sprawling agricultural lands, and no rivers of great length. Yet, this apparent limitation has never defined the country in a narrow sense. Instead, it has adapted its circumstances to make the most of what it has: a strategic location, a stable political system, and a population with strong cultural identity and deep connections abroad. Geographically, we have seen how the island's volcanic origins have given each one a distinct personality. The sharp peaks of Santo Anteo, the sweeping beaches of Boa Vista, the fertile highlands of Santiago, the stark cone of Pico do Fogo. Each is a separate chapter in the geological story of the archipelago. The climate, marked by long dry seasons and short, unpredictable rains, imposes certain constraints on life, but it has also shaped the architecture, agriculture, and water management systems that people rely on. Historically, Cape Verde's story begins with its discovery and settlement by the Portuguese in the 15th century, followed quickly by its role in the transatlantic slave trade. For centuries, it was a hub of movement, of people, goods, and cultures. And while that history included exploitation and hardship, it also gave rise to the Creole identity that defines Cape Verde today. Independence, achieved in 1975, was followed by a gradual consolidation of democratic governance and economic stability, making it one of Africa's most politically stable states. In the present day, Cape Verde continues to navigate the challenges of small island development. Its economy relies heavily on tourism, remittances, and service industries, with ongoing efforts to diversify into renewable energy, fisheries, and niche agricultural products. The diaspora remains a lifeline, not only through financial support, but through cultural exchange, innovation, and the maintenance of family and community ties across continents. Culturally, we have explored music, dance, cuisine, festivals, and language, all of which carry the marks of both African and European heritage. Morna, Funana, Caladira, and Batuk are not just musical genres, but expressions of a shared emotional and historical experience. Food, from the national dish cachupa to fresh fish and tropical fruits, reflects resourcefulness and a connection to the land and sea. Creole, in its various forms, is the language of everyday life, while Portuguese provides the formal link to government, education, and international relations. Tourism offers visitors a chance to see these layers for themselves, to walk on black volcanic rock, to hear live music in Mindelo, to taste cachupa at a family-run restaurant, or to watch turtles come ashore at night. The island's diversity means that each trip can be different, and repeat visitors often return to explore new places or simply to enjoy the slower rhythm of life. The fun facts and curiosities we discussed, from the vast diaspora to the influence of Saharan dust storms, from the achievements of the Blue Sharks football team to the international fame of Cesaria Evora, are reminders that Cape Verde's influence reaches far beyond its physical size. Its people and culture travel easily, carried across oceans by migrants, musicians, athletes, and ideas. In many ways, the country's greatest strength lies in its ability to maintain stability and identity while being deeply open to the world. This is not without challenges. Climate change threatens water resources, coastlines, and ecosystems. Economic reliance on a few key sectors leaves Cape Verde vulnerable to global shocks, as seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. Inter-island disparities can also create internal imbalances in opportunity and development. Yet, the same adaptability that has carried the country through past hardships continues to be its most valuable resource. For the listener who has followed this entire journey through Cape Verde, the picture that emerges is one of contrasts that complement rather than conflict. It is a place where a quiet rural village on Brava and a lively music festival in Mindelo both feel authentically Cape Verdean, where centuries-old traditions and modern ambitions share the same small space, where the constraints of geography are met with human ingenuity, and where a small population maintains connections that span the globe. It is also worth remembering that the country's narrative is still being written. New generations, shaped by both local realities and global influences, are finding ways to balance economic opportunity with cultural preservation. Advances in renewable energy, investments in education, and the potential for new industries like digital services may shape Cape Verde's next chapter. The role of the diaspora, too, will remain central as Cape Verdeans abroad continue to contribute ideas, skills, and resources to the island's development. As we close, it is fitting to return to the idea that has underpinned this series, that every country, no matter its size or prominence in world affairs, has a depth of history, culture, and identity that deserves attention. Cape Verde is not defined only by its beaches or its position on the map, but by the ways in which its people have created a distinct and enduring sense of place in the world. It is a reminder that sometimes looking closely at a small nation can reveal as much about human resilience and creativity as studying a large and powerful one. If you have enjoyed this slow and detailed journey through Cape Verde, you can find similar episodes on many other countries in our series. Each one offers a chance to learn something new, to explore the unfamiliar, and perhaps to see the familiar in a different light. Thank you for listening to The World's Countries, a production of Boring Travel and Geography for Sleep. If you found this episode interesting, or if you simply enjoyed the steady pace and the quiet exploration of facts, history, and culture, consider subscribing to the podcast or the YouTube channel. That way, you will be notified when we release the next episode. We also welcome your comments, especially if you are from Cape Verde or have traveled there yourself. Your insights, corrections, or additions are always appreciated. Until next time, we will leave Cape Verde's shores behind and turn our attention to another country, chosen, as always, in no particular order. Whether it will be a large, well-known nation or a smaller, less familiar one, we will take the same slow and thorough approach, uncovering the details that, piece by piece, make up the portrait of a place.